The first pale light of dawn settled gently across the foothills, outside Pine Ridge, Colorado, painting the quiet mountain town in shades of silver and gold. Main Street had only just begun to wake. Delivery trucks rolled past weathered storefronts. The American flag outside City Hall stirred in the cool morning breeze, and the familiar glow of Maggie's Country Diner spilled warmly onto the sidewalk, inviting early risers inside for coffee before another workday began. Ranchers gathered around their usual booth, discussing cattle prices. Construction workers laughed over biscuits and gravy before heading to nearby job sites. A retired Army veteran unfolded the local newspaper, while a young deputy grabbed breakfast before reporting for patrol. It was the kind of peaceful American morning that looked exactly the same every single day, where everyone believed they knew every face that belonged in town. At precisely 6 a.m., a dark gray rental SUV eased quietly into the diner's parking lot. The vehicle carried no government plates, no flashing lights, no official markings that might attract attention. It looked like any ordinary traveler stopping for breakfast during a long drive through the Rockies. The driver's door opened, and a black woman stepped out with calm, measured confidence that drew almost no attention at first glance. She wore a simple charcoal gray coat over a cream-colored sweater, dark jeans, and practical walking shoes dusted with traces of highway gravel. There were no expensive accessories, no visible badge, no security detail following behind her to anyone watching. She appeared to be nothing more than another professional traveling across America, yet there was something remarkably composed about the way she carried herself. She paused briefly before entering the diner, taking in the surroundings with quiet awareness instead of curiosity. Her eyes naturally located every entrance, every exit, every security camera, and every emergency access point without appearing to study any of them. Years of disciplined service had transformed observation into instinct. She noticed details most people overlooked, without ever making those observations obvious. When she stepped inside, the soft ring of the bell above the entrance barely interrupted the conversations already filling the restaurant. The comforting aroma of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and buttered toast drifted through the room. Country music played softly from an old speaker near the kitchen, while waitresses greeted longtime customers by their first names. It felt like the heartbeat of small-town America, where kindness often arrived with a smile and a warm cup of coffee before sunrise. "Good morning," the waitress said with genuine warmth. "Table for one." The woman returned an equally warm smile. "Yes, please. Somewhere near the window if it's available." Her voice was calm, confident, and gracious, carrying the quiet assurance of someone who never needed to raise it, to be heard within moments. She was seated beside the front window overlooking Main Street. She ordered black coffee, 2 scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and fresh fruit, before thanking the waitress by reading her name from the small badge pinned neatly to her uniform. "Thank you, Emily." The simple gesture caught the waitress pleasantly off guard. Most customers never bothered learning her name. As sunlight slowly brightened the street outside, the woman removed a small leather notebook from her coat pocket. Instead of immediately writing, she simply observed families greeted one another as they entered. A father lifted his sleepy daughter into a booth before heading to work. An elderly couple quietly shared breakfast, exactly as they had for decades. 2 firefighters stopped briefly for coffee before returning to duty. Every ordinary interaction reminded her why communities like this mattered. She wasn't searching for crime. She was studying character. Real leadership, she believed, revealed itself in ordinary moments long before it appeared. During emergencies across America, thousands of police officers put on their uniforms every morning with one purpose: protecting the communities they served with integrity, professionalism, and compassion. Most never made headlines because they quietly did the right thing. Every single day they earned trust through fairness, patience, and respect. Those officers represented the very best of law enforcement, and they reminded her why the badge remained one of the nation's greatest responsibilities. But experience had also taught her another truth. Public trust could be damaged by a single official who confused authority with power. One careless decision could overshadow the honorable service of countless dedicated officers who faithfully upheld their oath. That was precisely why she had chosen this journey weeks earlier. After accepting one of the most demanding leadership positions in American law enforcement, she had made an unusual decision. instead of remaining inside Washington, surrounded by briefings, press conferences, and carefully prepared reports. She began quietly visiting communities without announcing who she was. She wanted to experience America exactly as ordinary citizens experienced it. She wanted to see how strangers were treated before anyone realized someone important might be watching. Titles change behavior. Truth appeared before titles did. She lifted her coffee, watching steam rise gently from the cup, while making a few short notes inside her notebook. Nothing dramatic, nothing sensational. Only small observations that revealed how respect, professionalism, and public service looked when cameras were absent, and reputations were not being managed outside. Another patrol vehicle slowly turned onto Main Street, its familiar presence drawing quiet attention from several people inside the diner. While just beyond the front window, a figure stepped out of the cruiser and began walking toward the entrance with the unmistakable confidence of someone who believed the entire town answered to him. Sheriff Daniel Mercer pushed open the diner's front door with the confidence of a man who had spent more than 2 decades believing every room belonged to him the moment he entered it. The conversations that had filled the restaurant only seconds earlier softened almost instantly. Several regular customers greeted him by name. A few nodded respectfully, while others simply looked down at their coffee cups, continuing their breakfast without making eye contact. Mercer smiled briefly, acknowledging the familiar faces, but his attention was already drifting across the room, scanning every booth with the practiced habit of a career law enforcement officer. For many people in Pine Ridge, Sheriff Mercer represented security. Parents waved to him during school parades. Local business owners trusted him to respond whenever trouble appeared. He had helped rescue stranded hikers during winter storms, organized charity drives for struggling families, and attended nearly every Memorial Day ceremony, honoring veterans who had served the nation. Like thousands of dedicated law enforcement officers across America, he had once entered the profession with a sincere desire to protect his community. That history made what happened next even more tragic, because good intentions could never replace good judgment. Then his eyes stopped. The unfamiliar black woman sitting quietly beside the window immediately caught his attention. She wasn't causing a disturbance. She wasn't arguing with anyone. She wasn't breaking any law. She simply sat with a warm cup of coffee beside her breakfast, occasionally writing brief notes inside her leather notebook before calmly observing the life unfolding around her. To an objective observer, she looked exactly like a traveler enjoying a peaceful morning. To Sheriff Mercer, she looked unfamiliar, and in his mind, unfamiliar quickly became suspicious. Deputy Ethan Collins stepped through the entrance behind his sheriff, carrying 2 breakfast sandwiches he had picked up from the bakery across the street. Ethan was 31 years old, respected by fellow deputies for treating every citizen with professionalism during his 7 years in uniform. He had learned that every encounter deserved fairness. Before assumptions, he noticed Mercer staring toward the woman, but chose to remain silent, believing the sheriff was simply making routine observations. Mercer walked toward the counter, where Emily poured him fresh coffee. "Morning, Sheriff," she said cheerfully. "Morning." His eyes never left the woman near the window. "Know who she is?" Emily glanced toward the booth before looking back. "No, sir. She came in about 20 minutes ago. Very polite, just passing through." I guess Mercer's expression hardened. "Passing through to do what?" Emily shrugged with an uncertain smile. "Eat breakfast," several nearby customers quietly chuckled. But the sheriff didn't. He slowly crossed the dining room until he stopped beside the woman's table. His boots echoed across the polished floor, drawing everyone's attention. The conversations gradually faded until only the soft music and distant sounds from the kitchen remained. The woman calmly looked up from her notebook. "Good morning," she said with genuine courtesy. Mercer offered no greeting. "I'm Sheriff Daniel Mercer." She nodded respectfully. "Nice to meet you, Sheriff." Instead of returning the courtesy, he looked down at her notebook. "What are you writing?" She closed it gently without hiding it. "Just personal notes." "What kind of notes?" "The kind people usually write for themselves." Her answer remained polite, neither sarcastic nor defensive. Mercer's voice became firmer. "I'll need to see some identification." The woman folded her hands on the table. "May I ask if I've committed a traffic violation or broken any law?" The question surprised several people nearby because it was asked with complete respect. There was no attitude, no challenge, Only a calm request for clarification. Mercer frowned. I asked for your ID, and I'm simply asking what legal reason requires me to provide it. While I'm eating breakfast. Deputy Collins quietly stepped closer, sensing the conversation changing direction. The woman maintained steady eye contact, never raising her voice. Years of professional leadership had taught her that confidence didn't need volume. Real authority remained calm, especially when emotions around it began rising. Mercer folded his arms. People don't usually come into Pine Ridge taking notes. She smiled slightly. People travel for many different reasons. What brings you here? I'm visiting Colorado. Visiting who I haven't made plans beyond breakfast. Her answers were truthful, measured, and carefully limited. She wasn't refusing to cooperate. She simply wasn't volunteering information, unrelated to any lawful investigation. Across the diner, Emily watched with growing concern. She had served thousands of travelers over the years. Families on vacation, truck drivers crossing several states, college students exploring national parks, and retired couples driving through the mountains. Never once had she seen someone questioned, simply for enjoying breakfast alone. Sheriff, she said gently. She's been one of the nicest customers I've had this morning. Mercer barely glanced toward her. Emily, this is police business. She stepped back quietly, though concern remained written across her face. Deputy Collins looked at the woman again. Her breakfast sat untouched, her coffee had grown cold, yet she appeared remarkably composed, almost as if she had experienced difficult conversations before and understood that patience often revealed more than confrontation ever could. Mercer leaned slightly closer. You seem awfully comfortable answering questions. She nodded, I believe. Respectful conversation solves more problems than assumptions. The words settled heavily across the room. An elderly Vietnam veteran sitting near the entrance slowly lowered his newspaper. A young firefighter paused halfway through his breakfast. Even the cooks inside the kitchen glanced through the service window. Nobody spoke. The atmosphere had changed completely. Mercer interpreted her calm confidence as resistance, instead of professionalism. In his experience, people either became nervous or defensive during questioning. She had done neither. That unsettled him far more than any argument could have. He looked once more at the notebook resting beside her plate. What exactly are you observing? She answered without hesitation. People. What kind of people? The kind who shape a community every single day. Mercer's jaw tightened. Something about her composure challenged the assumptions he had already formed the moment he walked through the door. And instead of slowing down to reassess the situation, he became even more convinced that his first impression had to be right. His hands slowly moved toward the handcuffs resting on his duty belt, while every person inside the diner watched in complete silence. Sheriff Daniel Mercer's fingers rested firmly on the handcuffs, attached to his duty belt, as the silence inside Maggie's country diner grew heavier. With every passing second, the familiar clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed distant now. Every customer had stopped eating. Every conversation had faded away. The atmosphere no longer felt like an ordinary breakfast rush, but like a room waiting for one decision that would change everything. The woman remained seated exactly where she was. She made no sudden movements. She didn't reach into her pockets. She didn't raise her voice. Mercer avoided giving a direct answer. I determine what's suspicious in my county. The woman nodded thoughtfully. I understand your responsibility to protect your community. I also believe every good officer deserves the opportunity to demonstrate that responsibility fairly. Those words were spoken without sarcasm, without accusation, without fear. Emily stood behind the counter, gripping the coffee pot with both hands. She had served Sheriff Mercer for years and had watched him help stranded motorists during snowstorms, comfort families after accidents, and mentor young deputies beginning their careers. She respected the office he held because she respected law enforcement. Most officers she had known carried themselves with professionalism and compassion. That was exactly why this moment felt so unsettling. Nothing about the woman suggested danger. Nothing about her behavior justified the growing tension. An elderly, retired school principal quietly removed his reading glasses. This doesn't seem right, he whispered to his wife. Across the room, a construction foreman slowly lowered his coffee mug onto the table, without taking another sip. Deputy Collins finally stepped forward. Sheriff Mercer didn't look at him. I've got this. Ethan stopped speaking, though concern remained written across his face. The woman glanced briefly toward him. recognizing the conflict behind his expression. She had worked alongside thousands of law enforcement professionals throughout her career. She understood that most officers entered the profession because they genuinely wanted to serve their communities. She also understood how difficult it could be for honest deputies to question decisions made by long-time supervisors. "Your attention returned to Sheriff Mercer. I've answered your questions respectfully. You've answered them carefully. I've answered them truthfully." Mercer's voice became louder. "Then prove it. I don't have to surrender constitutional protections. To prove I'm innocent." Several customers exchanged nervous glances. The statement wasn't confrontational. It was simply accurate. The retired Army veteran sitting near the entrance quietly spoke for the first time. "Sheriff, maybe let her finish breakfast." Mercer turned sharply. "Stay out of police business." The veteran nodded respectfully and fell silent. Not because he agreed, because he recognized the conversation had already moved beyond reason. Emily slowly approached again. "Would anyone like more coffee?" It wasn't really a question. It was an attempt to interrupt the escalating confrontation before it reached a point no one could undo. "No, thank you," the woman answered politely. Mercer took another step closer. "I'm giving you one final opportunity." She met his eyes. "And I'm asking one final time. What lawful basis exists for detaining me?" For the first time since entering the diner, Mercer couldn't immediately respond. Instead of answering, he interpreted her calm confidence as defiance. Instead of slowing down, he doubled down. Instead of relying on procedure, he relied entirely on instinct. That single decision would define everything that followed. Mercer reached toward her wrist. Deputy Collins instinctively moved forward. "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "I said I've got it." The interruption ended as quickly as it began. The woman slowly stood from her chair. Without resisting, she deliberately kept both hands visible. She made no attempt to step away. Around the diner, several customers instinctively reached for their phones. Not because they expected entertainment, because something inside them recognized they were witnessing a moment that deserved to be documented. Emily felt her heart racing. Every instinct told her this situation was heading somewhere it never should have gone. The sheriff took hold of the woman's left wrist. His grip was firm but unnecessary. She neither pulled away nor protested. Instead, she spoke quietly enough that only those closest could clearly hear. "The strength of American law enforcement has never come from authority." Alone, Mercer remained silent. "It comes from integrity." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Deputy Collins lowered his eyes. He remembered his graduation ceremony at the police academy. He remembered raising his right hand and taking an oath to support the Constitution and serve every citizen equally. He remembered believing every word. The metallic click of steel echoed across the diner. One cuff locked around her wrist. A second click followed moments later. The room froze. Nobody spoke. Even the cooks had stopped working. She understood something. Almost no one else in the room yet understood. Character revealed itself most clearly under pressure. The sheriff reached for her arm. "We're leaving." She nodded cooperatively. "I won't resist," as they began walking toward the front entrance. She paused briefly beside her table. "My notebook," she said calmly. Mercer picked it up before she could continue. "I'll be taking this too." She simply nodded again. Every observation she had already made was safely stored, where it mattered most in her memory. The front door opened, and the crisp Colorado morning air rushed inside. Customers slowly followed to the windows, watching through the glasses. Sheriff Mercer escorted the handcuffed woman across the parking lot toward his patrol vehicle. Deputy Collins lingered near the entrance, unable to shake the growing feeling that the situation had crossed a line from which there would be no easy return. Far beyond Main Street, just beyond the curve where the highway disappeared, behind the pine-covered hills, the distant sound of multiple powerful engines began rolling steadily toward Pine Ridge. Growing louder with every passing second, the crisp mountain air carried an unusual stillness as Sheriff Daniel Mercer guided the handcuffed woman across the diner's parking lot. Morning sunlight now stretched across Main Street, reflecting from pickup truck windshields and the polished chrome of parked motorcycles through the large front windows of Maggie's Country Diner. Nearly every customer stood watching in complete silence. Nobody returned to their breakfast. Nobody resumed their conversations. Something about the encounter felt unfinished, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Mercer reached his patrol sub and opened the rear passenger door. "You'll stay here until I finish sorting this out," he said with unmistakable confidence. The woman looked toward him calmly. "I hope, Sheriff, that every decision you make today reflects the oath you took when you accepted that badge." Mercer frowned. "My oath is exactly why you're standing here," she answered with quiet dignity. "The oath every law enforcement officer takes is not a promise to defend personal assumptions. It is a promise to protect the Constitution, serve every citizen equally, and exercise authority with discipline." Deputy Ethan Collins stood several feet away, unable to ignore her words. During his academy graduation, those very principles had been engraved on a stone memorial outside the training center. Every recruit had walked past them before receiving a badge. Integrity before authority, service before self, justice before pride. Those lessons suddenly echoed louder than ever in his mind. Before Mercer could respond, a deep mechanical rumble drifted across the valley. At first it sounded distant, blending with the ordinary traffic, moving along the state highway. Within seconds, the sound grew unmistakably louder. Heads turned toward the eastern entrance of Pine Ridge. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans emerged around the curve. Moving in disciplined formation with remarkable precision, their dark paint reflected the Colorado morning sun, while discreet government license plates caught the attention of Deputy Collins. Almost immediately, Mercer narrowed his eyes. What now? The vehicles traveled steadily down Main Street, neither speeding nor hesitating. Everything about their movement reflected preparation. Discipline and purpose. Store owners stepped outside. Pedestrians paused along the sidewalks. The unusual convoy rolled directly toward Maggie's Country Diner, before slowing to a controlled stop beside the sheriff's patrol vehicle. The engines shut off almost simultaneously. For one long second, nobody moved. Then the doors opened together. Men and women dressed in dark business suits stepped onto the pavement with calm professionalism. Some carried slim leather portfolios, while others wore discreet communication earpieces. Their movements were efficient without appearing theatrical, the practiced coordination of people accustomed to working under pressure. The lead agent, a distinguished man in his early 50s, with silver hair and an unmistakably federal bearing, scanned the area before walking toward the parking lot. His eyes immediately found the woman standing beside the patrol SUV. Then he noticed the handcuffs. He stopped for the first time since arriving. Genuine disbelief crossed his face. 2 additional agents exchanged quick glances. Before quietly moving closer, Deputy Collins felt the knot in his stomach tighten. Something was terribly wrong. Sheriff Mercer stepped forward confidently, mourning. The lead agent looked at him without speaking. "I'm Sheriff Daniel Mercer." The agent acknowledged him with a slight nod. "Special Agent Robert Hayes." Mercer extended a hand. Hayes did not immediately take it. Instead, his attention remained fixed on the woman. Mercer smiled proudly. "If you're looking for the suspicious individual, you're a little late." He gestured toward the handcuffed woman. "I already handled it." Several agents looked from Mercer to the woman and back again. No one spoke. The silence itself became unsettling. Mercer mistook it for admiration. She came into town taking notes, refusing to identify herself, asking questions she couldn't explain. Agent Hayes took one slow step forward. His voice remained calm, measured, and completely professional. "Sheriff, yes. Would you mind telling me exactly why Director Nyla Monroe is wearing your handcuffs?" The words seemed to stop time. Mercer's confident smile disappeared. "I'm sorry." Hayes spoke with complete clarity. "The woman standing beside your patrol vehicle is Director Nyla Monroe." No one moved. The breeze carried only the soft rustling of the American flag hanging outside Town Hall. Mercer looked at the woman, then back at Hayes, then at the agent standing behind him. His expression shifted from certainty to confusion. "There has to be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," Mercer laughed nervously. "The FBI director doesn't travel alone." Nyla finally spoke. "Sometimes she does." Her voice remained exactly as calm as it had been inside the diner. No anger, no triumph. Only quiet confidence. Mercer stared at her. You're serious?" Agent Hayes reached inside his jacket and produced a federal credential. Deputy Collins immediately recognized the official seal. Hayes displayed it briefly before returning. His attention to the sheriff. "My team has been coordinating with Director Monroe throughout her nationwide community assessment program." Mercer's face slowly lost its color. Assessment program. The director has spent the past several weeks visiting communities across America. Without advance notice, Hayes paused. She believes public institutions reveal their true character when they believe no one important is watching. Customers slowly began leaving the diner, gathering quietly near the entrance. Emily stood beside the retired Army veteran. Neither could look away. Mercer swallowed hard. If she'd simply identified herself, Nyla answered gently. Would today have unfolded differently because of the law? She allowed the question to settle. Or because of my title? Mercer had no answer. Deputy Collins lowered his eyes. The distinction struck him immediately. Justice should never depend upon knowing someone's position. It should begin with treating every person fairly from the very first encounter. Hayes continued. The director chose to travel without visible credentials because every American deserves equal treatment, whether they're a federal official, a schoolteacher, a truck driver, or a family. Passing through town, several agents quietly documented the scene with photographs. Another noted the time. Another observed the patrol vehicle. Everything was methodical, professional, respectful. Nyla looked toward Deputy Collins. Deputy, he stepped forward. Yes, ma'am. I'd like you to remember something. He listened carefully. The overwhelming majority of law enforcement officers honor their oath. Every day they earn public trust through integrity, restraint, and accountability. She glanced briefly toward Sheriff Mercer. But when procedure is replaced by assumption, every honorable officer carries part of the burden. Created by that mistake. Collins nodded slowly. I understand you have an opportunity. Every day you wear that badge to strengthen public confidence. I won't forget. Nyla then turned toward Agent Hayes. Before these handcuffs come off. Several agents looked surprised. Hayes remained silent. She continued. I want everybody camera recording preserved. Yes, Director. Every dashboard camera. Yes, ma'am. Every dispatch recording. Understood. Every surveillance camera surrounding this diner. Hayes nodded again. It will all be secured. She looked around the growing crowd gathered along Main Street. Facts protect everyone. The statement carried no accusation. It reflected a principle. Facts protected good officers. Facts protected innocent citizens. Facts protected the truth itself. Sheriff Mercer stood motionless, the handcuff key still resting in his trembling hand. As additional federal vehicles began turning onto Main Street and more investigators stepped out, carrying evidence cases and sealed document containers, their arrival signaling that what had begun as an ordinary breakfast had now become the opening chapter of a much larger investigation. Federal agents moved with calm precision, not with the urgency of people chasing headlines, but with the discipline of professionals committed to protecting the truth. Wherever it led within minutes. The parking lot outside Maggie's Country Diner had transformed into a carefully organized scene. Yellow evidence markers were never needed, because this was not a violent crime scene. It was something far more important, a moment that would test whether the rule of law applied equally to everyone, including those entrusted to enforce it. Director Nyla Monroe remained standing beside Sheriff Daniel Mercer's patrol SUV, the handcuffs still resting around her wrists. By her own instruction, her composure continued to surprise everyone present. She showed no anger, no desire to embarrass anyone publicly, and no interest in settling personal scores. Instead, her attention remained focused on protecting the integrity of the investigation that had quietly begun long before she arrived in Pine Ridge. Special Agent Robert Hayes approached respectfully. Director, the evidence preservation team is ready. She nodded once. Good. Her voice remained steady. Every body camera, every dashboard recording, every dispatch communication, every surveillance system surrounding this intersection must be preserved exactly as it exists today. Nothing is to be altered, deleted, or reviewed outside. Official evidence procedures already underway, ma'am. Excellent. She looked toward the growing crowd gathered outside the diner. Facts protect good officers, just as much as they protect innocent citizens. Several deputies standing nearby quietly exchanged thoughtful glances. Many had never heard those words expressed so simply. Deputy Ethan Collins watched the director carefully. Throughout the morning, she had spoken about accountability, without once attacking law enforcement as a profession. Instead, she repeatedly separated honorable policing from the misuse of authority. That distinction mattered. America depended every day on thousands of honest police officers who responded to emergencies, rescued families during disasters, protected neighborhoods, and risked their own safety for complete strangers. Director Monroe's actions reminded everyone watching that accountability did not weaken law enforcement. It strengthened public confidence in those officers who faithfully honored their oath. Agent Hayes turned toward Mercer. "Sheriff, we'll need temporary access to your department's records." Mercer finally found his voice. "This is becoming completely unnecessary." Hayes answered professionally. "That determination will be made after the facts are reviewed. I've served this town for 23 years, and your years of service will be documented alongside today's events." Mercer looked toward the residents gathering nearby, searching for familiar support. Instead, he saw uncertainty. The same people who had trusted him for years now seemed unsure what to believe. Inside the diner, Emily quietly began clearing untouched breakfast plates. The booth where Director Monroe had been sitting remained exactly as she had left it. The coffee cup had grown cold. Her breakfast sat unfinished. The leather notebook was already sealed inside an evidence bag, after agents carefully documented its condition without opening it unnecessarily. Emily paused beside the empty booth. Only an hour earlier, it had looked like any ordinary morning. Now she understood how quickly one decision could change the course of an entire community. Outside, additional federal personnel arrived, carrying secure evidence containers. Their professionalism immediately stood out. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody rushed. Nobody treated anyone disrespectfully. Every conversation remained calm, organized and guided by procedure rather than emotion. Director Monroe finally turned toward Deputy Collins. "Deputy, yes, Director. I have a question. I'm listening. When you first entered the diner this morning, what was your first impression of me?" Collins hesitated honestly. "I thought you were just another traveler." She smiled gently, and after observing my interaction with the sheriff, he took a slow breath. "I believed you were being treated differently than you deserved. What changed your opinion?" He reflected carefully before answering. "Nothing about you changed." She nodded. "What changed?" "I started paying attention to the facts instead of assumptions." Director Monroe offered a look of quiet approval. "That's one of the most important skills any law enforcement officer can develop." Nearby, several younger deputies listened closely. Her words were becoming less like an investigation and more like a lesson in professional leadership. She continued, "A uniform gives authority." She paused. "Character determines how that authority is used." Those words settled deeply among everyone listening. Sheriff Mercer remained silent. For perhaps the first time in his career, he realized no amount of confidence could replace careful judgment. Once objective evidence began speaking for itself, Agent Hayes received another update through his earpiece. He stepped toward Director Monroe. "Our digital evidence specialists have completed the first preservation requests. Any issues? None. What about dispatch logs? They're secured. Body cameras uploading now. Traffic cameras already copied." She nodded with satisfaction. "Good work." Turning back toward the deputies, she spoke again. "Every profession earns trust differently." She glanced briefly toward the American flag flying above Town Hall. Teachers earned it through patience. She looked toward the firefighters, standing near their truck. Firefighters earned it through courage. Her attention shifted toward the deputies. And police officers earned it through fairness. She allowed the thought to settle naturally, not by proving how much authority they possess, but by proving that every citizen receives equal protection under the law. Deputy Collins quietly repeated the sentence to himself. Equal protection, not selective protection. The distinction felt clearer than ever before. Inside the sheriff's office across town, federal specialists had already begun securing public records, according to established legal procedures. Filing cabinets were photographed before being opened. Computer systems were documented before forensic copies were created. Evidence rooms were inventoried with local personnel present too. Maintained complete transparency. Director Monroe insisted every step remained fully documented. There will be no shortcuts, she reminded Agent Hayes, if our purpose is accountability. Our own procedures must reflect the highest standards understood. Several residents gathered along the sidewalk, continued watching. Quietly, an elderly Vietnam veteran finally spoke. "I spent 30 years believing the strongest officers were the toughest ones." Director Monroe turned toward him respectfully. He smiled sadly. "Today I remembered something my commanding officer told me long ago. She listened. He said, "Real strength isn't measured by how quickly you take control." He looked toward Deputy Collins. "It's measured by how carefully you choose to use it." The director nodded. "That's wisdom every generation deserves to hear." A young father standing nearby held his son's hand a little tighter. His 8-year-old looked curiously at the patrol cars, the federal vehicles and the gathering crowd. "Dad," the boy whispered, "are the police in trouble?" His father knelt beside him. "No, son." He looked toward Deputy Collins. "The law is making sure everyone follows the same rules." The child nodded thoughtfully. Director Monroe overheard the exchange. A small smile appeared across her face. Sometimes the most important lessons weren't written inside policy manuals or court decisions. Sometimes they began with one honest conversation between a parent and a child. Just then, Agent Hayes walked briskly back toward her, carrying a sealed folder that had arrived from the sheriff's office. Only moments earlier, his normally composed expression had changed noticeably, suggesting investigators had already uncovered information that extended far beyond a single wrongful detention. And the first pages inside that folder pointed toward a pattern no one in Pine Ridge could afford to ignore. Director Neela Monroe stepped back into Maggie's country diner, one last time before leaving Pine Ridge. The same window booth where the morning had begun was waiting for her, but everything else had changed. The fear that once filled the room had been replaced by quiet respect. Emily greeted her with a warm smile and placed a fresh cup of black coffee. 2 eggs and toast on the table. "This one's on me," Emily said softly. Nyla smiled. "Thank you, but today I'll pay just like everyone else." Equality means following the same rules, even when no one is watching. Emily nodded, realizing that true leadership wasn't about titles, it was about character. Deputy Ethan Collins entered a few moments later, removing his sheriff's hat before approaching her table. "I won't forget what happened today," he said sincerely. "This badge will remind me every morning that people deserve fairness before judgment." Nyla stood and shook his hand. "America doesn't need perfect officers," she replied. "It needs honest ones who are willing to learn. Protect constitutional rights and remember that every person deserves dignity, regardless of race, appearance, or status." Outside, federal vehicles quietly left town as Pine Ridge began a new chapter. The community had learned that the strongest law enforcement agencies are built on accountability, professionalism, and public trust, not fear or assumptions. Justice had not won because someone powerful arrived. It had won because the truth was allowed to speak louder than pride. As Nyla's SUV disappeared beyond the Colorado mountains, another small town waited somewhere down another highway, another ordinary morning, ready to reveal the true character of those entrusted to serve. Every badge carries responsibility, every citizen deserves respect, and every decision made in uniform leaves a legacy that lasts far longer than a single day. If this story touched your heart, we genuinely love to hear from you. What would you have done if you had witnessed this moment inside the diner? Should Deputy Collins have spoken up sooner? Or did he redeem himself by choosing integrity afterward? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective matters also. Tell us what powerful justice story you'd like us to bring next. Your idea could inspire our next unforgettable video.